Roman soldiers did not sleep as individuals when they entered enemy territory. They slept as part of a system built on discipline, routine, and collective security, where rest was treated as a tactical necessity rather than a personal comfort. At the end of a day's march, regardless of weather, terrain, or proximity to danger, the army did not simply settle where it stood. Instead, it constructed a fortified camp, a practice so consistent that it defined Roman military identity. Each soldier carried tools alongside weapons, and upon arrival they immediately began transforming open ground into a controlled defensive space. A ditch was dug, earth was piled into ramparts, and wooden stakes carried during the march were assembled into a perimeter wall. Gates were positioned with precision, aligned to internal roads that divided the camp into an ordered grid. This predictable layout meant that every soldier knew exactly where he belonged without confusion, even in darkness. Sleep began only after this environment of control had been established. Within the camp, soldiers shared leather tents in small groups, usually 8 men to a unit, creating a close-knit structure where responsibility was shared. These groups, bound by routine and mutual dependence, ensured that no one was isolated. Bedding was minimal, often consisting of cloaks or simple ground coverings, and comfort was secondary to readiness. Armor and weapons were kept within reach, not stored away, reinforcing the expectation that rest could be interrupted at any moment. The Roman approach to sleep was not about deep relaxation but about maintaining a state of controlled readiness, where the transition from rest to action could occur without delay. Security governed every aspect of the night. Guards were assigned in rotating watches, ensuring continuous surveillance of the camp's perimeter. These watches divided the night into structured intervals, and responsibility passed methodically from one group to another. Soldiers selected for guard duty were expected to remain alert under strict discipline, with severe consequences for failure. The system extended beyond the walls, with scouts and pickets positioned outside the camp to detect movement before it reached the defenses. This layered approach meant that even while most soldiers slept, the army as a whole remained vigilant. Lighting within the camp was limited. Fires were controlled carefully, both to reduce visibility to the enemy and to prevent disorder. Darkness was not an obstacle but an accepted condition, and Roman soldiers were accustomed to operating within it. Silence was enforced, not only to maintain discipline but to ensure that unusual sounds could be detected quickly. The environment of the camp at night was therefore quiet, ordered, and tense, shaped by the understanding that danger could approach without warning. Food and routine also played a role in preparing for rest. Soldiers typically ate before nightfall, consuming simple, durable rations that required little preparation. Meals were not elaborate, and their purpose was functional, to restore energy after the march and labor of building the camp. Once duties were completed, soldiers settled into their assigned spaces, following a rhythm that repeated day after day. This repetition reduced uncertainty and allowed individuals to rest more effectively despite the constant presence of risk. In enemy territory, the psychological dimension of sleep was as important as the physical. Roman soldiers were trained to rely on structure rather than emotion. Fear was managed through routine, and the predictability of the camp's design created a sense of order even in hostile surroundings. The knowledge that every soldier was part of a larger, coordinated system reinforced confidence. Each man understood his role, the roles of those around him, and the procedures that governed the night. This clarity reduced panic and allowed rest to occur under conditions that might otherwise prevent it. Weather and terrain influenced conditions but did not alter the fundamental approach. Whether in open plains, forests, or near rivers, the same principles applied. Camps were adapted to the landscape but maintained their essential features. Rain, cold, or uneven ground could make rest uncomfortable, yet the system remained unchanged. Roman soldiers were expected to endure such conditions without disruption to their duties. Their ability to sleep in these environments was not based on comfort but on conditioning and expectation. Communication during the night was controlled through signals rather than open movement. Passwords were issued to identify those authorized to move within or approach the camp, reducing the risk of infiltration. Any movement without proper identification was treated as a threat. This strict control limited unnecessary activity and preserved the integrity of the defensive system. Even within the camp, movement was purposeful and regulated, reinforcing the sense that the entire space functioned as a coordinated unit. The presence of officers and the chain of command extended into the night. Leadership did not withdraw but remained active, overseeing security and ensuring that procedures were followed. Orders were clear and consistent, and enforcement was immediate. This continuity of command contributed to stability, as soldiers knew that oversight did not lapse when darkness fell. The structure of authority was as present during rest as it was during battle. Sleep itself was often fragmented. Soldiers might rest in intervals rather than in a single uninterrupted period, depending on their assigned duties. Guard rotations required some to remain awake while others slept, and the possibility of sudden alarms meant that rest could be brief. Despite this, the system allowed for sufficient recovery over time. The regularity of the routine, combined with the shared responsibility among units, ensured that fatigue was managed collectively rather than individually. The Roman method of sleeping in enemy territory reflects a broader principle of their military organization: control over environment, behavior, and expectation. By imposing order on unfamiliar and potentially hostile landscapes, they reduced uncertainty and increased resilience. Sleep was not treated as a passive state but as an integrated part of operational readiness. Every element, from the layout of the camp to the assignment of watches, contributed to making rest possible without compromising security. This approach also had a cumulative effect. Over repeated campaigns, soldiers became accustomed to the rhythm of march, build, eat, guard, and sleep. The predictability of this cycle allowed them to function effectively even under sustained pressure. The act of constructing the camp itself reinforced discipline and cooperation, creating a transition from movement to rest that was both physical and psychological. By the time soldiers lay down to sleep, they had already contributed to the security that made that sleep possible. In contrast to less structured forces, where rest might depend on circumstance or individual choice, Roman soldiers operated within a system that removed ambiguity. There was no question of where to sleep, when to sleep, or how to prepare for the night. These decisions had been standardized, and adherence to them was enforced consistently. This standardization reduced the cognitive burden on individual soldiers, allowing them to focus on execution rather than improvisation. Even in the presence of imminent threat, the system remained intact. Camps were still built, watches still assigned, and routines still followed. The discipline to maintain these practices under pressure was a defining characteristic of the Roman military. It ensured that soldiers did not sacrifice long-term effectiveness for short-term convenience. By prioritizing structured rest, they preserved their ability to fight effectively the following day. Ultimately, Roman soldiers slept in enemy territory not by eliminating danger but by managing it through organization and discipline. Their rest was secured by collective effort, continuous vigilance, and a framework that transformed uncertainty into routine. In this environment, sleep became an extension of military order, sustained not by comfort but by control. Yet this system did not end with the night. As the first light of dawn spread across the camp, the same structure that governed rest transitioned seamlessly into action. Guards completed their final watch rotations, reporting to their superiors with the same precision that had defined the night. Soldiers rose not at random, but in accordance with signals and routine, each man returning immediately to his assigned role. There was no confusion, no delay, and no need for instruction beyond what had already been established through repetition. The camp itself, which had served as a place of controlled rest, now became a point of departure. Equipment was gathered efficiently, tents were dismantled, and tools were repacked with practiced speed. The defensive structures, though temporary, had fulfilled their purpose. What remained was the discipline that had made them effective. In a short span of time, the ordered grid that had defined the night was reduced, and the army prepared once again to move. This continuity between rest and movement was central to Roman effectiveness. Sleep had not been an interruption of military activity but a phase within it, governed by the same principles of organization and control. Because of this, soldiers did not need time to adjust from rest to readiness. The transition was immediate, supported by habits reinforced over countless marches and encampments. As the army departed, the landscape returned to its previous state, leaving behind only faint traces of the structured system that had existed there hours before. Yet the true structure was never the camp itself. It was the discipline carried by the soldiers, the shared understanding that allowed them to impose order wherever they went. This was what enabled them to sleep in hostile territory without surrendering security. In this way, the Roman approach extended beyond a single night or a single location. It was a method that could be repeated under any conditions, ensuring that even in unfamiliar and potentially dangerous environments, the army remained cohesive, alert, and prepared. Sleep, like every other aspect of their operation, was shaped by design rather than circumstance. What appears, at a distance, to be a simple act of resting in enemy land was in reality a controlled process, refined through experience and enforced through discipline. It was this process that allowed Roman soldiers not only to endure the uncertainty of hostile territory, but to function within it with consistency and confidence, night after night.